What we want to do today is have just a brief fireside chat with some of the leaders in our business, some of them with lots of experience in external development, some of them like Peter Moore with lots of experience. And Peter Moore, actually, we want to give him a round of applause because 16 years ago today, he launched the Sega Dreamcast, which is pretty darn cool, right? So let's welcome him to the stage. He is currently the COO of Electronic Arts. He is inked with some very interesting tattoos, and he's one of the coolest figureheads in this industry. Come on, give it up for Peter Moore.
Here, Vic?
I think I'm sitting there.
All right,
I think I'm sitting there. I know it's a bit nuts. We're going to get everybody on that little couch right there. This is our first game. Okay, and next up I want to invite Barry Dorf. He's the VP of Partnerships and Alliances at DeNA.
I'm going to sit behind you, Peter.
It's not my best view, Barry.
Dave McCarthy, he's the GM of Xbox Product Services at Microsoft.
Back.
And Shanti Bergel, he's the SVP of Business and Corporate Development at GREE. All right, I'm going to move over to here and we'll get started. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Yeah, this is very cool. Welcome to my basement.
This for us over here?
It gets a little rough in
A little
about
early.
20 minutes.
Please, yeah. Break that open. Let's do this right. What is it? It's
5 o'clock somewhere.
Yeah.
It's bourbon o'clock right now, isn't it? All right. Okay.
Me and Shanti only drink Japanese whiskey. Sorry, it's the GREE DeNA.
I can make an exception.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That would be a story to tell. All right, well, let's please briefly tell us the most interesting trends that you guys are seeing in this ever-changing game industry. It's a huge question, and I'm going to let every one of you guys kind of answer it. Okay, we'll start with you, Peter.
Well, from a broad industry perspective, I think the globalization of our business, you bring up the Dreamcast 16 years ago today, which I always like to think ushered in a new era of online gaming. I mean, actually, online gaming, period, albeit through a 56K board modem that, if anybody remembers, you'd listen to make sure the telephone line connected before you played NBA 2K or Sega Rally or whatever. And I learned more about TCP/IP and stacks than I would ever do in my life there in those good old days. But online gaming during that period, and it seems like a lifetime ago, but we were in a period of then in the late 90s, early 2000s, where it was fire and forget, launch and leave. We'd make a game. Yeah. Dave and his team, and Dave was making games at that time, and that game would be shipped, and the dev team would theoretically go to the beach for 2 weeks. And
theoretically, yeah.
Rinse and repeat. Yeah. And what we're in now is this wonderful period of games being 365 days a year, fresh content being created and pushed to gamers to keep them engaged, and we start to think about engagement as a key metric. Right. And we also think about the player journey and how they discover a game and how you get them into a game and how you keep them into a game. Sure. And then we at Electronic Arts see that being a curator of that journey. Whether it's franchises, we're 2 weeks away from shipping FIFA, and we just shipped Battlefield Hardline in the spring, and we look at engagement numbers. We actually don't look at sales.
You're in Canada, so NHL's next.
NHL is coming.
Yes, there you go.
Yep. And a little thing called Madden.
Yeah, a little thing called
Madden.
Madden.
As well. Yeah. So that trend for me in my now 16 years in the industry has been a quantum shift in the way we think about providing entertainment to gamers. Right. And I think our industry, when I joined and I left the footwear industry, we could count gamers in the tens of millions. As we look at the market now, obviously driven a lot by mobile, it's billions of people.
Well, let's shift over to mobile. Let's talk about GREE for a moment here and talk about what you've experienced, Shanti, and seen sort of change in your years of development.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's been impressive, especially over the last 3 years, but it extends even beyond that, is the durability of games that are done in free-to-play. So, like when I first started doing mobile games at GREE, like we saw life cycles that were, kind of sub 1 year. So some games would last a couple of months or even 6 months. A hit would be, like maybe 9 months. And so I think teams thought that way. They thought, like, hey, we're going to launch this game and then we're going to launch another one. But there, it was still a service model, but it was a little more fire and forget than it is today. Right. So today you look at things that are either at the top of the charts, they've been there for multiple years. We have games in our portfolio that are 3 years old. And so like mobile for us is starting to look more like a free-to-play MMO business. And so like we see games that are going to last, like we think 5, maybe even 7 or 10 years. And so that speaks to both the longevity of hits that come out in this space, but also the relationships that are necessary to support them, which is like one of the reasons that I think Barry and I are probably here for, like at least this is my first time to be at XDS. The software is getting more complicated. And so like I used to be in console, and I'm familiar with a lot of the trends that we're now seeing in mobile, but a lot of folks who are mobile only have never seen this before. So a lot of the complexity that's coming into mobile now is a result of these longer-lived games and more advanced hardware, and just the general trend toward more complicated software over a longer period of time leads to just general complexity in relationships, in technology, and in project management. And so, like, it's exciting because, like, who doesn't want to work on, like, a hit that lasts 10 years? That's very, like, I think we could all dream of that kind of an experience. On the other hand, it's a nightmare from, like, a complexity standpoint. Like, there's a lot of things to manage as you start talking about managing multiple companies over a 10-year period, and managing something that's fun. And so I think the durability is the thing that is, like stood out for me. And then there's a lot of implications for our space in terms of how we manage against that.
Dave, let's talk to you for a moment here. You've come from Electronic Arts, which had a foothold in console and PC game development. And now you're sort of with a platform company with Xbox across multiple, verticals. But how is it sort of from your perspective? How have things changed? And is a company like GREE and these ever-present games that sort of never end a threat to the Xbox gaming business?
Ooh, I wouldn't identify that stuff as a threat. I think what's cool in the industry now is gamers are everywhere. And it's really interesting. Once a year we sit down and we look at where the revenue and profit pools are in the industry. And the big change I've noticed over the last 2 decades is that even spread really between the traditional console business, the traditional, say, PC and desktop business, and then mobile and tablet. And it really is, fairly equal between the 3 groups. And interesting to see the shifts in growth rates over time, which is reflective really of gamer habits now. We have a generation which was not the generation we entered the industry in, but is now the industry that is, the generation that's paying our paychecks. And they don't know those boundaries. It's as natural to sit down on a console with a tablet beside you and game across those devices and get onto your PC desktop. And your expectation is that you won't feel like you're in a walled garden. You'll feel like you can flow easily across those ecosystems. And I think that's awesome as a consumer. It's awesome for us as a business to be able to take gamers across those. Peter mentioned new geographies as well as part of that. Growing rapidly. It creates a lot of challenges for developers. You've either got to kind of pick your area or you've got to be versatile across all of them.
Which Microsoft is trying to be?
We are trying to be that, I mean, that's kind of the advantage of being a platform company, is be relevant across all of those. So I think it's a really exciting time. Definitely a different landscape than we faced when I entered the industry.
Well, this industry has never not been revolutionary. It's never not reinvented itself many, many times. I don't think it's been as revolutionary and crazy to kind of pinpoint as it is currently. And one of the, I think the biggest identifiers of that is that Nintendo is going to be making mobile games with DeNA. Congratulations on that deal. That's amazing. Talk to us about your perspective on how things have changed.
Well, I think the convergence of what's happening today between the 2 big industries of console and mobile is pretty exciting. When I first got to NG Moco, I told my friends I was leaving the console world for mobile. It was, I got kind of shunned and laughed at. And it took about 4 or 5 E3s for people to finally start to embrace everything. And this last E3 was the best. This last E3 was a big love fest. Everyone was all together and everyone was in harmony. Everyone understood the synergies between sort of the 2 groups and industries. And I think Fallout, the mobile game, really helped kind of bring both of those worlds kind of together and in a great way. But another trend that I see, and Peter touched on the engagement factor and the KPIs that we see. So it's one thing to say, oh, well, of course you want to look at engagement, but the thing that I love about the industry today is that not only do we have so much data that we can track of our users' but what's important in those numbers changes daily or weekly. So, in the beginning, you'd want a day one retention number. You'd want to look at, in our world mobile, how many people come back the next day. And then we start thinking about, well, maybe it isn't day one that's important. Maybe it's day 40 or 50 or 60 that's important.
Wow.
And then the trends of what those numbers mean to monetization was that stuff blows me away when you look at numbers. And I love to go to a whiteboard and draw numbers on the board when developers come in to meet with us, because it's a different way of thinking today than even last year.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about where we are. And the trend is that it's always changing.
It seems to me that there's an opportunity right there for a sort of a company that sits in the middle of all this. It seems to be that there's a cross conversation that has to be happening. And I'm playing Metal Gear Solid 5 right now, and I'm getting daily rewards every time I log into the game. So obviously, the console guys are paying attention to a lot of the disciplines and a lot of the game styles of the mobile space. All right, well, let's talk about external development. Dave, I'm going to start with you. What was the impetus for leveraging external partners?
Microsoft is not a cheap place to fund internal development sometimes. It's a big company, and with a big company, becomes a cost structure there. So originally, it was really a financial motivation for us to be able to have the flexibility to deal with the lumpiness of production. So I oversee both sides of Xbox, our studio's first-party development piece, and then our platform development and live service as well. And in both of those areas, it is, even though we are moving to games as a service, there's still some lumpiness there.
Sure.
And being able to flex across our franchises and identify strategic partners in different areas of the world and different areas of expertise was a real win for us in order to get the development model to the place we needed it to get to, from both a cost structure but also a delivery time frame as well.
Barry, from your vantage point, why would you need external development as a mobile developer?
Well, we see it as kind of two ways. One is the amount of content that's in these games now, and Shanti touched on this, the content flow that has to happen in these games. You got to keep up with the trends. And globally, the way people absorb content in Korea is different than the way they absorb content in the West. It's different than Japan. It's different than China. What we build content-wise here for 3 to 4 months, they'll absorb in 2 weeks in Korea. Mm-hmm. It's just amazing the way. And so you have to keep ahead of the curve at every point. You have to look at your whales and your most engaged users and make sure there's enough content for them. That's the first way, of course, it's creating that content. And the second way is with Unity. We build a lot of our games in Unity now. And we think of games as engines. We think of this space as creating engines that are successful across the board. So the quicker we could get to market with an engine and test it with those KPIs we talk about, the better. So the more engines we can get out there, the better it is for our company.
Excuse my ignorance. What are KPIs?
Key performance indicators, these retention numbers that we're talking about, ARP down numbers, spend, retention, all that stuff is a KPI.
If he didn't know KPI, he probably is not going to know ARP down.
I'll pick some of this up, okay? I don't make games, I talk about them. Peter, how have you seen the practice of external development evolve in your organization? For example, is the practice now treated a little more formally? Do you have formal roles to at EA to work with external developers?
Yeah, there's two things. We have a central development group that actually is based right here in Vancouver that looks at what we need to do to deliver against all the platforms and the geographies we've just talked about. And Barry touched on it as well, is then this concept of not just localization, but culturalization. We're delivering, let's take Plants vs. Zombies, which is a great franchise that came from a PopCap, 90 minutes south of here.
Right.
And what we've built into now is a culturalized version. Great example, we have PopCap China that has a completely different view, still the same characters. You need tons of support in art. You need localization. You need the ability for people on the ground, let's call it, in this particular instance, Shanghai, to tell you what it needs to do to make this game successful. And then when you multiply that by the 80 to 90 countries we do business in, and the 68 offices and studios we have around the world, we have 8,500 full-time employees, and I'd say about 4,500 are directly involved in development. That's insufficient for us to deliver versus the appetites of this global gaming community.
Right.
And so we actually don't call it external, we call it integrated development, because external feels like it's us and them.
Sure.
We have teams, particularly with art, when I think about that, what we need to do, that are hand in glove with our development teams and our production teams. And it allows us to deliver a lot less games. When DMAC, boy, at our height, remember we were doing 60 games a year, and EA now at its core level will probably deliver 13 this year.
Right.
But the amount of focus, the quality, the breadth, and the fact we've got to keep these things alive 365 days a year requires a ton of external work for us to bring these teams in, whether it's our DICE studio in Stockholm, our Go studio in Gothenburg, our EAC studio right here in Vancouver. It takes a village now to build these games. And I'm not just talking about the game itself, because if games don't have companion apps, if they don't have websites, we have 450 social media websites supporting all of our franchises.
Right.
So we have requirements for integrated development that not only keeps the core game alive, but keeps the ecosystem around that game humming. Because I think we've all said it, if you're not delivering content each and every day, then the engagement drops. There's too much stuff you can find in the App Store. There's too much stuff you can find in Xbox Live or PlayStation Network that will catch your eye and you'll go move on. You've got to engage every single day. And that takes a village.
How much learning has come from the way that Hollywood kind of shapes their model around their entertainment properties and their IP?
We've learned what not to do.
Yes, yes. I mean, but don't they have a lot of external development that they kind of bring into the fold?
Well, and interesting, right here in Vancouver, which is the hub of the film industry in Canada for a lot. There's a lot of talent here.
The visual effects capital of the world right
absolutely.
now. So,
But I would argue that what we do, first of all, we are a superior medium. Let's make that statement right there.
Agreed.
No doubt about that. We're interactive. Secondarily, the ability for us to continue, which you can't do with a movie, it's a linear and passive medium, a movie, that you can enjoy, but it's all over.
Yeah.
And we're not that in gaming. It's funny, I went to see, interesting, my wife suggested, let's go see Straight Outta Compton. I said, do you realize what and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It was great, but that's it. We walked out of the theater, enjoyed the movie for 99 minutes and whatever it was.
Yeah.
And then it's done. Well, that's different. What they're thinking about is windowing. Okay, when does this thing go to DVD?
Right.
When does this thing then go to broadcast? And when can we go to Netflix on this stuff?
Right.
We in the industry think very differently. And so when a movie is shot, goes into production and is done, then everybody disappears, right? They move on to the next project. That's not how our industry works today.
Okay, so Integrated Development Summit next year?
There you go.
Is that what it's going to be?
Get on that, Chris.
All right. Now, Shanti, what are some potential new areas that you see on the horizon when we might want to engage external partners? For example, working with them to embrace disruptive technologies like augmented reality or virtual reality, connected TV, Apple Watch, maybe an Apple TV that games in about 45 minutes or something like that. How can you see external partners helping in those areas?
Yeah, so I'll probably speak a little bit less about this from GREE's perspective and more about it from like an investment perspective, because I'm also an angel investor as well as doing some investing on GREE's behalf. The reason I say that is because those are probably not areas that GREE is going to engage in actively in the immediate term, but they're terribly interesting and probably are a place where you'll see companies and investors partner with developers and external partners a lot in order to address something that is pretty unproven at this point. So, I mean, for example, I think there's a lot of attention that's been paid to virtual and to AR. But for a big company in the short term, the opportunity space is less commercializable, and so it's a great opportunity for new players to come in, prove out things that are interesting. And so, if you have capabilities that are easily leverageable into those adjacent areas. So, for example, in virtual reality, if you have Unity expertise, you can probably find people in the VR community who are willing to fund a VR project and use your Unity skills in that regard. I think there are things that are like much more adjacent to the existing business that are interesting and commercializable in the immediate term that probably don't get as much attention. Maybe esports is one of those,
sure.
Where the communities around some of these games that have gotten big enough and are long-lived enough. I think we as a group still don't, we as a group as an industry still don't pay as much attention to the amazing depth and commitment that people have around these games. And there's
Right.
very few companies that really pay attention at the level that I think you can in order to build something that's durable over time. I think Riot does an amazing job at this. Blizzard does an amazing job at this. There's a very small company in mobile that's trying to prove it all called Super Evil Megacorp. They have a MOBA that is doing quite well in certain territories. And so those areas, I think, are adjacent to the existing business and are an area that a lot of folks are focusing on from a financial perspective today. But the new stuff, the truly new bleeding edge, kind of technically tantalizing but commercially challenging, I think that's an area where you will see people invest in teams. I think the bigger companies will probably, if they're not developing the actual platforms, be a bit followy from a content perspective.
Right. Dave, let's talk about AR, because obviously Microsoft is heavily invested in HoloLens. Was that something that was all generated internally, or was that something that you saw from tech companies that were experimenting and you brought it internally?
Well, HoloLens was a long time cooking. We've been playing around with it for a while in the bowels of Redmond's studios. We definitely did involve our external partners in some of the early experimentation there. And I would say, with AR in particular, we probably had a broader purview than just gaming.
Yep.
I think we saw the VR space, lots of great players there, lots of great partners, exciting innovation about to be commercialized. But with AR, early days, but we feel we have a real neat differentiator there with HoloLens. And we were, in fact, rolling some of our development partners off of our first-party console franchises and filling in some of the gaps with some experimentation. You may have noticed at E3 this year, we did the Minecraft HoloLens demo.
That was amazing.
And there was some involvement there as well in those pieces.
Yeah. Barry, let's talk about DeNA, and specifically, let's stay on this topic here for a second. I don't know what Apple's releasing today, whether this TV thing will actually be a gaming device. There's been lots of connected mobile/TV type of options available to us, but maybe the market is about to shift. For a company like DeNA, is that interesting? And is it something that you would say, okay, well, now we're back in the console space, we need to grow a team to be able to make this game suitable for television?
No, it's not that interesting for us just yet.
Mm-hmm.
We're a pretty conservative company, and we kind of wait for the market to mature before we kind of dive in. And when you think about VR, we have a VR game that we launched called Protocol Zero on the Samsung Gear VR, and it was a great test for us to kind of test the waters. But we definitely like to see a market mature. I think about a mature market as anywhere where you're going to be able to get over $100,000 a month in revenue as a minimum to start the hockey stick curve. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to enter a market, VR, Apple TV, or any sort of extra market that isn't mature enough. We're all billion-dollar corporations here. We look for the franchises that are going to be, in that realm that's going to help us grow. And it's important to stay ahead of the curve from a technology standpoint. But you want to see a market really mature before you kind of dive in deep.
Gotcha. Okay. Dave, in speaking with stakeholders in your organization, what do you feel are the biggest opportunities yet to exploit with respect to utilizing external development?
Sort of on the theme of moving to this more integrated model with us, it's interesting to see some of the shifts that are occurring as we move to games as a service. Things get a little more complex in terms of dependencies downstream. As part of looking after Xbox operations, I get the bills at the end of the day for customer support of any issues we have in market, all of the infrastructure we run to power things like Xbox Live. And it's amazing. We can make one or two bad decisions upstream in our development process. Maybe we don't share a crucial piece of information or technology or integration tip with one of our partners. And that could come back to bite us in terms of millions of dollars down the line if we don't do it. So for us, we kind of have this philosophy now of shift left, we call it, right? So shift quality up the development funnel, right? So that we're not, it's very expensive to support consumers, in a call center at the end of the day. It's very frustrating for people when things don't work on Xbox Live the way they should, and very costly for us to deal with those situations. So very important for us to kind of integrate our partners more and more early on, I would say opportunity-wise, into the process. Not just to save money, but to make for a better experience for our customers.
I'm curious if you can each give me an example of some great external development, like just something. And I know it's hard to pick a favorite or pick a baby, baby that you love more than another. But give us an example so we all take away something about each of your organizations specifically. Let's start with you, Barry.
Sure. We had a Transformers trading card game called Transformers Legends, and we were. We looked for art houses that can actually create the level of quality artwork in those models that Hasbro would approve, that we would like, that we would actually get behind. And we found a couple houses that were great, so much so that Hasbro has now created books using the artwork that we've done, and they're using the artwork that we created to actually sell their toys.
That's amazing.
So when you go to the boxes, you look at all the Transformers, all those 3D images that you see are from our game. So
that's great.
All that was done external.
What was the company?
We used several companies. So
okay.
That's
okay, gotcha. Shanti?
I would say the one that stands out for me is actually a company here in Vancouver. So we did a publishing deal with them for a game called Knights and Dragons. The company's called Ayugo. And to that point about durability, this game has now been running for 3 years, which in free-to-play in general and in mobile specifically for a publishing arrangement, that's a really, I think, strong achievement. There's very few publishing relationships in mobile that last that long, and it's been very, I think, good for the players, it's been good for Ayugo, it's been good for GREE. And the thing about it that I'm particularly proud of is that they were very much our test case for the way that we wanted to approach publishing in, at that point, a fairly nascent free-to-play mobile market. And so we did some things that were, in the West considered to be a little bit out of the ordinary. Like, for example, we're an equity shareholder in the company. We invested, and the reason we did that was because we believed in the longevity of the partnership and the games that they were going to make. And so one of the ways that being a shareholder as well as a partner allowed us to behave, I think, correctly and enable the success case was free-to-play has some amazing characteristics that are extremely recursive. So like every day you're making decisions around content releases. Every day you're making decisions around features and monetization and marketing budget allocation. And all of those decisions day on day, if they're a degree off, compound. And so, if you are in a long-term games as a service relationship with another party and you're making recursive mistakes, clearly that's not going to be a desirable outcome over the long term because you're going to be degrees off by the time you get 5 years out. And so, in a market that is as competitive as it is today, I mean, it is hyper-competitive in mobile gaming now. So being degrees off is not an option anymore. And so, we're very proud of that relationship because it enabled us to be very on message on both sides of the table. Everyone was aligned around what they wanted to see from both a creative and from a business standpoint. We allocate money against that game from a budgetary standpoint as if it was one of our own, because it is. And so, it was a model that we hit upon back then, and we still use today because it was so successful.
Fantastic. Peter?
So as we mentioned, in a couple of weeks, we'll be shipping a game called FIFA, built right here in Vancouver. And part of the gold standard for what FIFA has delivered in the last few years is a mode on top called FIFA Ultimate Team. Most people in the room are probably pretty familiar with it. It delivers unbelievable engagement numbers on a global basis, as well as delivering several $100 million in revenue on top of the FIFA franchise, which allows us to reinvest and make the game better every single year. It is absolutely the gold standard for the digital transformation in this industry. And in fact, the number is closer to $400 million as a mode on top of a game.
Wow.
And those are the numbers we talk about publicly. 15,000 players, 750 teams, innumerable stadiums, couldn't be done just here in Vancouver. And without getting into names, because there is literally dozens of companies that help us with the art. The idea of each of those players, which if you've played FIFA Ultimate Team, you have a card, and there are ratings, and you trade, and there's a marketplace. That game today couldn't be built using the resources solely we have in Vancouver. And there are so many companies that are supportive, that are integrated into development, that hit every deadline we need to do. If you're a soccer fan, you know something about the thing called the transfer window, and you know about now kits being changed every single year. Imagine the art that's involved. And we got golden tea going right there. I guess that's what it is. It's time to put quarters in. And it is the world's biggest sports video game every single year, and couldn't be done without a myriad of external developers, particularly with what we have to do with art.
That's a pretty great example.
Yeah.
Dave?
I always get grief when we pick favorites. The nature of our job is we're not supposed to pick
why I
favorites.
didn't
So
name
thank you
Yes.
for that.
Very diplomatic.
We have a tidy little franchise launching now, Forza Motorsport,
Right.
which is now really the world's
Amazing
leading.
commercial, by the way.
Yes.
That new commercial. Has everybody seen this
UK.
thing?
Pretty cool.
It is a love letter to the video game industry.
Yeah, that team is the real deal, and that franchise really is, the leading racing game of this generation now. From our perspective, we're really happy with it, and interestingly enough, our external development partners have played probably the biggest role in that franchise out of all others in our first-party studios lineup. And what's really cool for me is we have several partners working on our hero cars in it, and I mean, for a racing game, it doesn't get more important than that. And the fact that we've got to this place now where the vast majority of our car content is generated by our external partners, to me is a real testament both to the Forza development team, Turn 10 Studios, but also the quality of their development partners in getting stuff done. It's really been a model for the rest of studios to follow.
Fantastic. Yeah. We're going to open up the floor to questions as well. We want to hear from everybody here, or anybody here. I've got one more question for everyone. What is the one piece of advice you would give to external partners that are looking to win your organization's business? Peter?
I think it's got to be about what you're going to do to enhance the player experience for us that we can't do.
Okay.
It sounds very ethereal, but it is something that we look at, and a lot of it's to do with how do we continue to make it a 365-day-a-year experience. We talk about franchises a lot at EA, but that's exactly what they are, and these are games as a service that need to be supported. There's an entire ecosystem. I'd say probably 30 to 40% now of our development teams work in what we call live operations. Yes, they're involved in the development of the game, but they stay on that game. They can't do that without the support of external integrated development partners here. And if you're pitching EA, think about our key elements of who we are as a company, do a little bit of research, and it won't take you long to figure out that we focus on digital transformation, we focus on being players first, and we focus on being one team, and that one team element of it is very important because that's not just the employees who carry a EA badge.
Yeah.
It's the partners that we have that are part of that team. And at EA, we'll tell you, we weren't always that way. It's an interesting place, and it's a 30-plus-year-old company that at times, through the tough times as well, was fragmented. One team is a very important part of who we are.
Can I call you DMAC?
DMAC.
Okay, DMAC worked at EA?
Yeah.
Did you work at EA?
I did.
Did you work at EA?
Yep.
There we go. Did you all work at EA? Yeah, I haven't worked at EA yet. But have you seen that a lot? The external developers that you use used to be internal developers.
One of the things you learn, and Dave works in Redmond, is that Vancouver's a great example. And it's funny, I was telling the story. I was staying at the hotel last night, walked to my favorite coffee place. So typically Canadian guy walks out with me and says, "Hey, let me walk with you. Let me tell you a story about Vancouver."
Really?
Absolutely. And within 100 yards, we were best friends. But we were talking about, he was interested, he's a doctor, and I'm going to story tell here, and he has a lot of patients who are EA employees. We're a big employer here in Vancouver.
Yep.
And he's watched it over the years from when EA first acquired Don Matrick's little studio.
That's right.
And put a tentpole down in this city.
Sure.
And created an ecosystem that, as we discussed, is bigger than games.
Yeah.
Visual effects, digital art. Tiny little story. First time I ever came to Vancouver was to be a zombie in House of the Dead movie by
awesome.
Uwe Boll. Never been to Vancouver in my life. Spent 10 hours on a mountainside on the X-Files production area
Sure.
in the rain being shot over and over and over again. But I think that's the key. I mean, companies like ourselves, industries like ourselves, put their roots down.
Yeah.
And from that, and no more so than in Redmond, is that people will then form other companies and satellite companies in support. And yeah, are they maybe looking to get acquired? Or they may be looking for business? You bet. But you come this tent pole, and then this infrastructure builds up around Redmond. Walk down the street and Nintendo's there by sheer coincidence.
Yep.
But when you think of Seattle, we certainly think of Vancouver, and of course where I live in Silicon Valley. Ecosystems develop. And we were talking before, it's with great pride that we at Electronic Arts feel the impact we've had on the industry as a training ground, as a university of hard knocks, as somewhere when you look at resumes, and if you've been in the industry long enough, chances are you've passed through EA.
Sure.
And we're a better person because of it.
Sure. Advice from you, Dave.
Yeah, I think I'd relate it to Peter's point, actually, which is, advice-wise, don't forget the value of relationships in this industry. We are a people business, as much as anything else. We're gamers. It is, even though it feels like a big industry, it's actually a small one. So the fact that the four of us once worked in the same company at the same time is commonplace.
Sure.
And I think, it's easy to get tied up in the business opportunity that a certain contract may present you, but I would focus as much on cultural fit and relationship, because you are going to be spending a lot of time with these development teams. No two of them are the same. Even within our first-party structure of Turn 10 and 343 and the coalition up here in Vancouver making the Gears franchise, there's a ton of variety in their approaches. And I think, if you want to have a healthy, happy employee base and one that delivers a quality product over time, making sure that relationship is a really good fit for you, value-wise, communication-wise, I would see that as a critical thing to weigh against any business opportunity that you're looking at.
Shanti?
Yeah, I think I would also add to that. So the point around relationship is important. I think that kind of manifests itself in practical terms, and we view a lot of our relationships with other companies in kind of a continuum of strategic versus kind of more transactional. The more strategic that you as a vendor can think and move up the scale, I think the better it is for the overall longevity of the relationship. So it is, I think, a people business. I do think that you will see the same people again and again if you are in the business for any length of time. But if you are kind of consistently presenting your company in a transactional manner, it becomes a very commodity-oriented conversation. Whereas if you're thinking about yourself in terms of how do I, to Peter's point, how am I going to fit into this ecosystem that this company has built? So, there's a franchise that's been standing for X number of years. What is it that they really do? How do they really behave? Who are the people inside that franchise, and what do they think about on a daily basis for their challenges? How do their players interact with that franchise? And where can I plug my solution in today and then build up from there? And so I think that mindset is important because those are the kind of people that we like to work with from our side.
Is that because you're still kind of developing the market in a lot of ways as well?
There's some of that. I mean, I think from a sophistication standpoint, frankly, we in mobile are still kind of light years behind folks who are doing much bigger games on other platforms.
Yeah.
So there is that aspect. But what I'm really getting at is the idea that as a vendor, you have a unique opportunity to define your opportunity within an account, so to speak.
Sure.
And the more that you lead, by showing kind of how your technology can be used, how your services can be used, how you as a vendor can add value over time, I think the better it is for you, and hopefully the better it is for us on the receiving end.
What about you, Barry? And as Nintendo, would you now consider them an external development partner?
I mean, you mentioned Nintendo. I mean, the reason that they went with us is because of our mobile games are all about server-side back-end technology now, and I feel like we're the leader in the space, if not the best, one of the top And so when people come and pitch us services and companies and everything, they really need to do their research on the company and the strengths of that company. We don't need server help. We don't need help in Japan. We don't need help in China. Like, there are things that we can use and things that we would like to have external help for. So we want to see the pitch geared towards us. We want to see the research done. Like Shanti said, if it's just the deck that's the same deck they've pitched 10 times over, I can sniff that out, a mile away in the first minute, and I know what that pitch is going to be, and I know what that developer is going to bring to the table. So we want to see something geared that's really going to help us in a way that somebody else can't, or that we can't do it internally, or that's frankly going to save us money. And I'll listen to any pitch that's going to save us money.
Right. Do we have questions from the audience?
So my question is, I know those big companies, you started to outsourcing your contents long time and may have a lot of vendors already and may have very stable relationship with those partners. So what is your process to add new vendors on your system? Because we all know every year there should be 1,000 new outsourcing or another outsourcing companies in this world. So what is your system to add new vendors?
Okay. Yeah. From a Microsoft perspective, we've taken an approach, I think, similar to EA. We've created our outsourcing middleware group. I think they just wanted the OMG moniker on it, if I'm honest.
Exclamation mark.
Yeah. But for that exact sort of challenge of, hey, how do I negotiate all these different studios and leaders and opportunities? And so we've centralized that, sort of a one-stop shop for any development partner to go to. They have visibility to stuff that's going on across all of our studios.
So for the first answer to the question, it's get in contact with the outsourcing middleware group.
OMG.
Okay.
Yep.
At Microsoft.
At Microsoft. Yep.
Okay.
That's right.
And I think the second question was actually very interesting about differentiating the assets and making sure that they're, because we as gamers see that all the time. It's back to the old 16-bit days where they would just put a new coat of paint on backgrounds and things like that, and it's like, oh, it's the same game with new characters. How do you make sure that the art assets from a company that is working on a bunch of different games aren't duplications?
Well, I mean, that sort of gets back to that relationship point and how integrated you are into the development process, right? I mean, it's extremely a well-oiled machine now with things like development bibles for various franchises, really close alignment with art directors and audio directors on things to make sure that stylistically things are in tune with the franchise. That's when things go wrong, though, is when that relationship isn't right or when the Bible isn't there in those relationships. And so we have those things in place. It's not perfect, but definitely a tool we use to try and get that alignment.
Okay, good questions. Is that something that you're seeing less of as we, especially in the console space, make less and focus more on individual titles? And that seems to be what EA is working on, is making, and I think something that Nintendo has always kind of exemplified is make every game an event, and put a lot of resources into each and every product that they ship.
Well, as we move into this world of live operations, you can only sustain at a quality level so many games. Mm-hmm. This is not throw mud against a wall, hope some sticks, do it again the next year.
Yeah.
This is build out FIFA, Madden, Battlefield, Need for Speed. Dave talked about Forza. I was there when we were building Turn 10 in Millennium E, and an email went out, said, anybody interested in making a racing game that can write code? That is how, Dan Greenwald, you asked these, this is how it was built. I mean, and Forza is a great example in that, again, I've been gone a long time, but I still watch this franchise with a great deal of pride. We built Forza to compete with Gran Turismo. Mm-hmm. And because at that time, the thinking was, if you're going to be a first party, you better have a world-class racing game to show off the box.
That's right.
As we always said.
Mm-hmm.
But when you think about what we need to do to sustain this stuff now, it is less games. So there's no way Electronic Arts or Ubisoft or Activision could sustain things. I'm looking at this Guitar Hero Scratch thing. I mean, there's only so much you can do to maintain the incredible quality requirements of today's modern gamer.
Right.
All right? Otherwise, because God forbid you ship something that doesn't quite feel right.
Yeah.
I mean, you're fortunate you're playing Metal Gear Solid right now, Metacritic 90-something.
Yeah, it's an amazing game.
But there's been a few games that remain nameless the last couple of weeks that have been eviscerated.
Yes.
Because they don't quite meet the bar.
Yeah.
And you can't do that by throwing volume out there.
Isn't that amazing that we're here for this whole external development conference? And I mean, I think the message is clear from the people up here that we all have groups that manage external development for a reason, right? That this is important enough to us. And you talk about how to get in touch with us. There's groups at each of these companies, and it's not hard to find. And you can approach any one of us after the conference, I'm sure. Maybe not Peter, but
I have people.
One more minute.
But that's the amazing thing. I mean, that's a very clear message that I think should be sent, that all these big companies now have these groups.
Sure.
Barry and Shanti, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the current console market, and you've come from that, you've moved into a totally different space. What do you see when you look at PlayStation and Xbox and Nintendo these days?
I mean, I look at opportunity. I mean, I think the opportunity for crossover in these games is amazing. I think we'd love to get some of our games up on Xbox, and it's the way that you're converging as a gamer, the way you are playing with your iPad on your lap when you're watching TV, or you have your phone playing something else. I think that the current console market has been great, and it's been a big uplift for the industry, and I think it can carry all of us to take that leap to try it out and see what happens. We'll talk after the show.
Good stuff.
Shanti, how about yourself?
Yeah, I think the things that I've seen that are exciting are definitely come from those insights around an audience or a franchise or both that enable something new across kind of different platforms or different play patterns. So I think FIFA Ultimate Team is a good example. Fallout is also a good example. These games that basically take something that either is new that people know and love, or something that is old that people know and love, and are able to unlock something kind of new and interesting as a result of that. So the application of kind of modern free-to-play techniques to console, I think, is an interesting idea that is, kind of has been a long time coming, and I think is, starting to bear fruit. So I think that is a very promising area on console. Is basically a lot of the, like you mentioned, you can tell that the designers for some of the console games that you're seeing have paid attention to social. They've paid attention to free to play. They've paid attention to mobile. I think you'll see some interesting blending of lessons learned in other places, be they free to play or just straight online, in mobile in the coming years.
Awesome. I can't pass up the opportunity to have these guys on stage and not ask 3 more questions. Dave, where's Crimson Skies?
Sorry?
Where's Crimson Skies?
Oh, jeez. Come on. Just wait for one of Phil's tweets. He does a better job at that than I do overall. Yeah.
Peter, where is SSX and Road Rash?
It's, SSX is right here in Vancouver.
Are we going to get a new
right here in
SSX
Vancouver.
at some point?
Who knows?
As ski season is about
And
to
Road
start?
Rash, I don't know. I mean, it's the challenge we have a little bit, without diving into the details, is we talked about this before we came on stage. Licensing rights, there's some embedded tech that somebody owns. There might be a patent in there. Dave knows. I mean, there's so much stuff that we could dig out and put out there, and then somebody comes after you straight away. You may have all read. I mean, we had a Madden developer. You all remember this. That was a contractor that wrote some code, and sued the company 22 years later and got a settlement. Yeah. And so companies like ourselves with IP that is relatively dormant, albeit popular, always have to think twice. Crimson Skies, I remember, was a great game, but you got to go figure out. And we also have, as an industry, we look back to those days and think, what a great game that was. And then it's like when I take my kids to movies to go see things.
Right.
I think,
they're better in memory.
Yeah, better in your memory than actually enforcing it on your children again. So these are issues we face, and I worry as much about licensing challenges and technology challenges within some of our games, even wholly owned IP.
For sure. Barry, when are we going to hear about these Nintendo games?
We have announced there's going to be 5 games between now and the beginning of 2017, and the first one will be announced before the end of the year.
Okay. All right. That's good. Any other questions before we close out? Anybody? All right. Well, join me in thanking our panelists.
Yeah. A lot of fun.
Thank you all very much.